Hi everyone, it's Michelle here. Welcome back to Ground and Haven Homestead. I have the very last video of this pantry challenge for 2022, and this week, since it was kind of a short week, I have 3 dinners to show you, as well as a bonus freezer meal idea, and then I also have a bonus dessert in there as well. So let's get right into the meals that we had for this last week. First, we're going to be having some black bean tacos, which we have pretty often, but I haven't shown how to make my flour tortillas, and some of you have asked for me to show that to you, so here it is. We're starting with 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then I have about 2 to 3 tablespoons of lard here, which I think is the best fat to use when making tortillas. I think a lot of recipes use vegetable oil, but I've never tried that, so I can't say if you'll get a similar result. I just always use lard. I'm going to start smushing this lard into the flour and really trying to get it very evenly distributed so that there are no more lumps. This is not like a pie dough where you want big lumps of fat to create flakiness. You really want to think about it as if the goal is to coat each of these grains of flour in a little layer of fat. This is going to prevent the flour from forming gluten when we add the liquid. Normally you want gluten to form when you're making bread because this is what helps the bread to rise, but since tortillas are a flat bread and I want my tortillas to be very thin and not bready or puffy, this is a very important step to be able to achieve that result. Once I feel like my lard is nicely incorporated, I'm going to start adding the liquid, and the total amount is about 3/4 cup, but I usually don't measure my water. I will just add a little bit at a time until I feel like everything is coming together and there are no big patches of dried flour left over. And we are not going to knead this. Kneading this is going to form gluten, which again, we do not want for our tortillas. So you're really just trying to combine the flour and the water and mixing just enough until everything's incorporated. And those are all the ingredients. It's only 4 things, but if you don't count the water, it's really just 3 ingredients. It's so simple and easy. We're not going to add baking soda or powder because again, we don't want any leavening in here. And the result is going to be a really nice, flat, but chewy and stretchy tortilla that is very tender. The next very important part of the process is to cover your dough and just let it rest for a minimum of 30 minutes. I've let it go as long as like 2 hours if there's something in the garden or somewhere else that I need to take care of. But you really do need to give it that time to rest because even with the minimal mixing that we've done right now, it's going to be a little bit tough and we want time for any of that gluten to relax. And this time also allows for the flour to become completely hydrated with the water, and it just makes it a lot easier to work with. Here's what my dough looks like after 30 minutes, and if you can see the difference, it's a little bit more pliable and stretchy, and now we can start working and shaping our dough. I'm going to start pulling off little pieces of dough and stretching the sides so that everything's a really nice smooth circle and then flattening it. This is a pre-shaping thing that I do, kind of similar to if you were making buns. And the size of this is totally up to you. You can do whatever size you want. I like to have my tortillas on the small side for tacos, but I'll usually do 2 sizes at once. I'll do like a small tortilla and then I'll do more of like a medium tortilla from this same batch of dough. That way we can have tacos fresh the first night, and then the second night I can make quesadillas or enchiladas with the larger tortillas. So for like a 4-inch taco, I'll do kind of like a ping pong size ball, and then for a medium tortilla, I'll do maybe like a lime size ball. But again, this is whatever you want. This recipe works no matter how big or how small your tortillas are, so it's totally up to you and what you're going to use them for. I like to go in and separate all of my dough and pre-shape it into these little discs first because again, working with that dough is going to activate some of that gluten and it's going to kind of bounce back on itself. So by pre-shaping all of these, by the time I get back around to the first one that I've shaped, it's been sitting there for 5 to 10 minutes, and that is just more time for that gluten to again relax, and then it's going to be easy for me to roll out. By the way, this whole time when I start this process, I have a cast iron on the stove and I have that preheating on medium heat. That way when I'm ready to start rolling out, the pan is nice and hot and ready to go for my first tortilla. Now it's time to roll them out, and I just use a rolling pin for this. I keep telling myself I need to invest in a tortilla press because I make tortillas a lot and it's honestly a little bit tedious rolling them out with a rolling pin. Totally doable and it's a good workout, but if you had a tortilla press, it would probably go a lot faster. I'm just gonna roll out each side, flipping over occasionally to make sure it's not sticking to the board, and also rotating 90 degrees in between every couple of rolls so that I can get as close to a perfect circle as possible. But these are homemade tortillas, so it doesn't really matter what shape they are. Even if they're a little wonky, they'll be just fine. And I'm really just trying to get these as thin as possible. And once I have them rolled out, I can go over to my preheated cast iron and throw that right on. And the first tortilla is kind of like the first pancake. It's going to be a little bit weird until your pan is completely evenly heated up. So it might take a little bit longer than the next ones, but I basically just leave it onto the pan until I start to see little bubbles forming. And right when I see those bubbles start to form, I like to flip it as quickly as possible onto the other side, which will take about 30 seconds. And then on the second side, it's going to be much quicker. You only need like 10 to 15 seconds. So here's the first one ready to flip. And you'll notice that it's really pale in color. You do not really want any browning here because if it gets to the point where it's brown, it's going to get really stiff and hard. So we actually just want it to be just cooked and not let it go too long so that it's still really pliable. After that tortilla is done, I'm going to move it over. I have a plate on the side with a dry towel that I immediately cover the tortillas with. You want to make sure that they're covered so that they don't dry out. And also, as you cook these and you add those hot tortillas to that plate, the tortillas are going to create steam inside the towel, and this is going to help keep them really soft and just fully finish cooking them in that steam. I don't find it necessary to have a dedicated tortilla warmer or to have a hot damp towel or to keep them warm in the oven. I find it to be just fine to put my tortillas onto the plate with that dry towel, and usually these will stay warm for at least like half an hour, which is enough time for me to make the filling later on and for us to sit down and eat. Since I've been making tortillas for a while, I can usually get into a pretty good system where I can roll out the next tortilla while the previous one is cooking. But if you're new to this and maybe you're a little bit slower rolling out the tortillas, it is helpful to have a little flipper assistant. Sometimes Aaron will help me with this, but if you have like a kid or someone else to help you, that's a really good job to hand over to a second person. Now that my tortillas are done, I can just use that same pan to make my black bean filling. I have some diced onions that I'm starting off with here, and then I'm going to also add some minced garlic and about a tablespoon of homemade chili powder. And once those spices have bloomed in that oil, I can add my black beans. I have some black beans that I cooked a couple of weeks ago, and I did that in a video where I cooked up like 2 pounds of dried black beans. And I usually have a container or 2 of these in the freezer, so all I have to do is defrost that and throw it into my onions and spices. And since I cooked these from scratch from dried beans, they already have salt and flavorings in them, so they already taste really good, but the onions and chili powder will bring out even more flavors. I also like to take my spatula and kind of smash those beans a little bit to release some of the starches so that it's somewhat in between like a regular bean and a refried bean. It makes almost like a paste that I find makes them a lot easier to eat because they're not falling out of your taco. At the very end, I squeeze in some lime juice to brighten up those flavors, and then here is our final spread. We have our black beans. I have some pickled onions and radishes. I also found some lettuce growing in our greenhouse. We have some homegrown, home-canned salsa, as well as our habanero and pineapple hot sauce. Then we have homemade sour cream, and then of course our homemade tortillas. This meal is always so satisfying because we can include so many things that we've grown and made ourselves, and this has really evolved over the years. We started off with just a few ingredients that we would make from scratch, and now pretty much the whole meal is homemade or even homegrown, which is really exciting. Here's a closer look at that finished tortilla, and you can see that it's really nice and pliable, and it stays super flat as well. I feel like the complication that most people get into when they're making tortillas is that they turn out too bready and they get really thick and they're not flat like this. So if you go through the steps that I showed you, hopefully you can have good luck, and let me know if it works for you. For another meal that week, we had some pizza, and I have a batch of pizza dough that I just whipped up here. I actually doubled the recipe, and this is going to make 4 pizzas. I'm going to cook 2 of them tonight, and 2 of them I'm actually going to be making frozen pizzas. So first I'm splitting this off into 4, and each of these I'm going to shape into a nice ball, tucking those ends underneath to make a nice smooth top. And then I'm just gonna cover these back up and let them sit for about 5 to 10 minutes while I let my oven preheat. I am preheating it to 425 degrees, which is what we're going to use to cook 2 of the crusts to make our frozen pizzas. So I'm gonna start shaping those out by just using my fingers. I'm not using a rolling pin. I really like to have kind of like that handmade, hand-tossed texture. So all I do is stretch it out with my hands, leaving a nice ridge for the crust area, and it's really easy and simple to do. And for these frozen pizzas, these crusts are going to bake for only 3 to 5 minutes on a baking sheet in that 425 degree oven. We are basically just par baking this. We don't want to bake it all the way. It's going to finish baking when we go to heat this up when we actually eat it later on. Making frozen pizzas from scratch is a new thing that I just started doing in like the last year or so, and it has been amazing. Frozen pizza is one of those things that we kind of bought pretty often. I'm not gonna say how often, but it was definitely a regular at our house because they're just so easy and I really like pizza. But I figured if I tried to make it myself, it would be cheaper and healthier, and I'm really happy with the results of making frozen pizza this way. It turns out really good. So I'm going to throw those crusts into the oven once it's preheated, and you may also see that I already have my cast iron on the lower rack, and that's going to preheat while these are baking, and they've been in here the whole time since the oven's been preheating so that it's nice and hot when we go to cook our other pizzas later on. Those crusts are done baking after just 3 to 5 minutes. You can see that they've kind of like puffed up, but they are definitely still raw inside, not fully cooked yet. That's okay. I'm going to take them out and let them cool off before we add the toppings. Meanwhile, I'm going to now preheat that oven to 500 degrees for the pizzas that we're going to have fresh. Here are the toppings that we're going to be having on our pizza. I have some dehydrated cherry tomatoes from the garden last year, and I'm just going to reconstitute these by soaking them in some warm water. And then for our other toppings, we have some sliced onions as well as some spinach that I harvested from out in the garden. I'm really amazed with how well our spinach has overwintered this year. It's looking very nice out there, and I've been able to pick a good amount every couple of weeks or so. I also have some leftover caramelized onions from last week when I made those grilled cheeses. And then I have a container of pizza sauce that I just took out from my freezer. I haven't canned pizza sauce yet just because you need a lot of tomatoes to make it, and so far we've only had enough that I just freeze them in these containers. Hopefully next year we'll grow enough tomatoes that I can start canning this. Once our cast iron has preheated nicely in that 500-degree oven, I'm going to take it out and put some cornmeal along the bottom, put in one of my crusts that I've shaped the same way as I did for the frozen ones. And I'm going to add some of my pizza sauce and then take a quick break because my smoke alarm went off.
I got it.
Gosh. Oh my gosh, I can't hear anything. Back to the pizza after we finally got that smoke alarm to stop beeping. Just a heads up, this probably will happen to you if you have a cast iron and a 500-degree oven. Anytime I bake like sourdough or pizza, my smoke alarm always goes off. But anyway, continuing on with my toppings and my cheese, I have a mixture of mozzarella and a sharp cheddar here. And I'm going to just make these pizzas one at a time since I'm making them in my cast iron and not on a pizza stone. So this is gonna go on the bottom rack for about 10 minutes. And then I'm gonna take it out and add a little bit of an untraditional ingredient. I'm adding an egg right on top of the pizza. We add eggs on everything because we have so many to eat. And I also just think it's a really nice, fun element on a pizza. This is gonna bake for about 5 more minutes until those whites are set. And it just adds a really nice, like smooth, velvety texture on top of the pizza, and that yolk is still runny, and it's really nice and creamy. After that first pizza is done, I'm going to take it out and then we can just move right into making the second one, which is going to be just like the first one. We're finally starting to get some really nice, beautiful late afternoons and evenings around here, and that day was a really beautiful one, so we decided to have our dinner right out on the patio, which was such a nice treat to soak in some of this nice weather. And it just makes me so excited for the summer and for warmer weather when we can eat all of our meals outdoors again. So let me just go back to those frozen pizzas before we move on to the next meal. These are the crusts that I par baked, and they have cooled off now, so I can just top them just like I did for my fresh ones. And after I put the toppings on, this is not going to bake. It's going to go straight into the freezer. I'm going to freeze it on these sheet pans until they are frozen solid. And then after that, we can just wrap it up. And when it comes time to bake, you can bake this at 400 for 15 to 20 minutes until the cheese is melted and as browned as you would like it to be. And that's all there is to it. It is a really easy process if you're making pizza. It's not that hard to just go ahead and make a double batch of the dough and you already have all of your toppings out. So it's one thing that I'm really happy I started doing because it's such a quick and easy meal when we're really busy or if I don't feel like cooking. I can just pop one of these in the oven and it cooks up really nicely. So here are my pizzas the next day after they are frozen, and I'm just gonna wrap them up. I wrap them up in a layer of plastic wrap and also aluminum foil, and then if it fits, I'll stick it into a Ziploc bag as well for extra protection. I know this is a lot of packaging, but I do try and reuse my plastic wrap and aluminum foil at least, so I'm not using so much single-use material. And yeah, it's just a really nice convenience food that is homemade. So the last dinner I'm going to share is going to be a pretty simple one because we had a long day out and we got home and we were just kind of tired, so I wanted to have something really quick and easy. This is basically just going to be a sheet pan meal. We're going to cook everything in the oven. I have some potatoes, onions, and carrots that I covered with olive oil, salt, pepper, and garlic powder, and we're just going to roast this in the oven for 20 to 30 minutes. And I also have some salmon fillets that were frozen that I defrosted that morning, and we're gonna be cooking those up as well. I'm gonna cover this with olive oil, salt and pepper, and some lemon slices. Pretty simple and classic, and then I'm gonna put these in the oven when those roasted vegetables are almost done because these are only going to take about 10 minutes to cook. To go with this, I have a bag of farro that I had cooked a couple of weeks ago and I had frozen in some Ziploc bags. So I just took one of those bags out and I can microwave it. And then I also decided to add just a little bit more flavor in there. So I have the bowl that I had mixed my vegetables in. So it has some leftover olive oil and salt, pepper, and just some good flavors. So I threw it in there, and then I also have a cube of frozen chimichurri. So I'm gonna throw that in and just let the heat of the farro kind of like melt that olive oil and get it all nicely incorporated so that this is kind of like an herbed farro, and it's just gonna add a little bit extra flavor there. It's times like these that I am really happy that I went ahead and just cooked a massive batch of something, because it makes for really nice quick meals later on when I'm busy or tired. So here's the finished meal. We have our roasted veggies and that delicious salmon and our farro. So a really nice hearty meal that did not take a lot of effort at all to put together, which I was really happy about. So since this was only like a half of a week and I didn't have that many dinners to show, I figured I would show you a dessert that I made, and I'm going to be making some creme brulee, which is probably one of my favorite desserts. I have 2 cups of heavy cream that I'm going to heat up in a saucepan until it is starting to just simmer. And then I'm going to separate some egg yolks from whites, and I'm going to need 3 egg yolks for this recipe. I'll link the recipe that I'm basing this off of in the description box, but I am halving it just because my ramekins are pretty shallow and I know I'm not going to need that much mixture. So we're just going to be using the yolks. The egg whites I can save for an omelet for the next day. And then I have some vanilla sugar. I showed how to make this vanilla sugar in our vanilla extract video. It's pretty simple. You just use like used vanilla beans and you put it in some sugar, and over time this is going to infuse the sugar with that vanilla flavor. I'm using half a cup of that and I'm going to whisk it into my egg yolks until it is pale yellow and very creamy. And then once that cream has come to a light simmer, I am going to very slowly start mixing that cream into our egg and sugar mixture. We're tempering the eggs here, and you don't want to do too much hot cream at once because then you'll end up with scrambled eggs, which is not what you want here. So just doing very little at a time. And then as you start incorporating more cream, you can add more cream at a faster pace. And you just want to slowly get those eggs up to temperature so that they don't curdle on you. And once that mixture is pretty warm, you can just pour the rest of it into the cream mixture and add it back to the saucepan. And this is going to have to heat up a little bit more until we get to a nice custard consistency. I'm also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract for more vanilla flavor here. And when you first start off, this is going to be a little bit thin, so you can see as I lift this spoon up, the mixture falls right off the spoon and it doesn't coat the spoon, but as you continue to heat this up, it's going to start getting a little bit thicker and creamier, and you'll know that you're done when you lift this up and that mixture really coats your spoon and doesn't drip right off of it. So once that looks like it's done, I'm going to strain this out in a sieve and into a measuring cup so that it's a little bit easier for me to pour into my ramekins. I have my ramekins set in a roasting pan here, and my ramekins are pretty wide and not very tall, which makes them really nice for creme brulee because you have more of a surface for that nice sugar top that we're gonna make later on, but you can use whatever ramekins you have really. Since mine are a little bit more shallow, I'm going to have to bake them for a little bit less than the recipe calls for. But I'm just gonna fill them up to as close to the edge as I dare to do, because we are gonna have to move this to the oven and this can spill pretty easily. So I'm gonna get as close as I can, and then I had some leftover mixture, so I'm going to be making a couple of these larger ramekins as well. I'm gonna place this into my oven and just leave the lip hanging out so that I have enough space to add some boiling water into my baking pan here. And I wanna fill this with water coming up about halfway up my ramekins. This is gonna make a nice gentle water bath so that the custard can cook very gently. And I'm gonna do the same thing for my larger ramekins, but these ones are going to have to bake for a little bit longer since those ramekins are a little bit taller and there's more mixture in there. I ended up baking the shorter ones for about 20 minutes and the larger ones for about 35 minutes. And to know when they're done, I give it a little bit of a jiggle test. And I just shake the pan a little bit, and you should see that the edges are set, but the center should still be a little bit jiggly. You don't want to cook it until there's no jiggle, because then it's going to be overcooked. For the larger ones, you can see that when I jiggle it, there are ripples along the surface, and it's still very liquid, so that needs to cook for longer. After those come out of the oven, they're going to need to chill in the fridge for at least 4 hours and up to 2 days. And then I'm going to sprinkle more of my vanilla sugar on top of this. And you want to get a pretty good layer here. You don't really want to be able to see any of that custard so that you have enough sugar on there to caramelize, and this will protect the custard from being torched as you blowtorch it. And then we're going to blowtorch it, which is the best and most fun part of making creme brulee at home. So using our blowtorch, we're going to run it over the surface of that sugar until everything melts and caramelizes. And you want to move around so that you're not in one place for too long, because you want to melt the sugar, but you don't want the mixture underneath to get really melty or warm. And that's also why you need this to chill beforehand so that the bottom of your creme brulee is still nice and cold. As that sugar cools down, it's going to make a really nice glassy hard surface. You can crack into it with a spoon, and it's the perfect topping and contrast to that creamy custard underneath. Creme brulee directly translates to burnt cream in French, and it's really worth making at home just so that you can have a reason to play with fire and blowtorch something. So before I finish off this video, I wanted to give you guys a little update on how our pantry is looking after 2 months of this challenge. So I'm in my creepy basement right now, which is where we store a lot of our canned goods, and we also have our chest freezer down here as well. So I'll give you a little look at what we have left after this pantry challenge. Here is my top shelf of canned goods, which has a lot of my older stuff, and I do still have some of this stuff to use up. I still have quite a number of jars of cowboy candy, as well as the cowboy candy syrup, but the barbecue sauce that I made in one of the videos was so good that I feel confident that I'm going to be able to use all of these up. We have some other random syrups and stuff. And I did start out with a lot of jars of dill pickles from years ago, and I'm down to just one left, so I'm really happy about that. So yeah, I still have some stuff to use here, but I'm happy with the progress I've made. Down here, we had a bunch of jams here, and we've used through some of those, a peach one that was in that barbecue sauce again, and then some strawberry jam that we usually have for our toast, and then I still have ground cherry jam. I have not dug into these yet, but I do think that these will make nice presents because they're kind of cool and different and not really something you can get at the store. So I think I might save those to give away. Only 1 quart of tomato sauce. And then some of this other stuff. We only have 2 jars of bread and butter pickles left. We still have some applesauce. Still have lots of hot sauce. I think this hot sauce will last us probably into next year as well. But you can see that I've been using jars, and I'm starting to run out of space for our mason jars upstairs, and I'm starting to bring our empty ones down here. Down here are a lot of our tomato products. So here we have diced tomatoes and also our salsa. We are probably about halfway through the salsa that I canned this year. So this whole box here was full, and you can see now there are empty jars here. And I still have plenty of diced tomatoes left, which is nice because the previous year we went through diced tomatoes really quickly. I also recently was able to stock up on mason jar lids that I found, and I have a whole box of these, so I am prepared for the next canning season, which is going to start very soon. So I feel really good that I'm going into the year with plenty of those. So yeah, that's a little update on our canned food. We've definitely made a dent in it, but we still have plenty left, which is great because even though the gardening season is starting very soon, it's gonna still be months before we can get a lot of this stuff producing well enough to be canning again. Like you can see a lot of these tomatoes and salsa that I can. I usually can them from July to September, so we've still got like 3 or 4 months that these cans will have to last us through. As for our chest freezer, I will give you a little look at my inventory sheet. We have really eaten a lot of our frozen vegetables that we put up. So we started with like maybe a dozen bags of green beans, and we're down to just 3 of those. Finished all of our corn, all of our cherry tomatoes and okra, zucchini. We only have a couple of things left like pumpkin puree. And then I went through a lot of broth too for a lot of like our soup recipes. So we're down to just a few of those. But it's looking pretty good. I still have a bunch of pizza sauce and pesto. And I'm going to need to update this sheet soon since it's starting to get a little messy with all of my scribbles. But I'll give you a quick look inside. If you watched our pantry tour back in November, this thing was filled to the top. It was so hard for us to close this. And now it's really nice, and I started organizing things in these bags so that I can just lift the whole bag out and get underneath, which has been really handy. So we still have a bunch of winter melon in here, and we've got some frozen fruit. So there's definitely still plenty in here. So we're going to keep working on eating more of this food. And even though the pantry challenge is over for us now, we are going to be going back to the store for anything that we need. To be honest, the way that I cooked during this pantry challenge is really similar to how I usually cook. I always try to limit the number of times we go to the grocery store. I would say max we go to the grocery store like twice a month. So it wasn't too much of a challenge for me, honestly, but it was still a lot of fun to come up with different ways to use all of our ingredients and to show that with you guys. And if you really enjoyed these videos, please let me know because I would like to continue making videos like this. Maybe it won't be a pantry challenge video, but maybe I can just do videos that show you what we eat in a day or in a week using stuff from our garden and from our pantry. And as we get into the garden season, which is coming up very soon, we're going to be cooking with a lot of fresh homegrown veggies as well, which is really, really exciting. I am so excited for that season. As fun as it is to challenge myself to use these pantry ingredients, there's nothing quite like cooking with homegrown fresh vegetables. Let me know if you guys would like to see more videos like that to stay tuned with everything that we're going to be up to this year. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.